Hi everyone. Now that we have covered the lines bishop a5, bishop c5, and bishop e7 in the Evans Gambit, I would like to look at the line bishop d6 on move 5, and then go ahead and show you a game between Kasparov and Anand from 1995. Let's now look at the option bishop d6. After bishop d6, white plays d4, knight f6, castles, and rook e1. So the idea is that we gave up a pawn, and our compensation mainly relies on the awkward position of the black bishop here on d6, which prevents a smooth development of the queenside pieces, mainly the bishop on c8, but also the rook will have a hard time, and the queen doesn't have too much mobility either. So rook e1, now, for instance, h6, knight bd2, rook e8, and again, the familiar diagonal, typical move for the Evans Gambit, queen b3. Now, knight a5 is met with bishop f7, king f8, queen a4, with a big advantage. That's why black typically chooses either rook e7 or queen e7. After the former, rook e7, right now there actually is kind of a threat, rook a5, trying to exchange this annoying bishop, so we move it back, bishop d3, queen e8, right? Like I said, it's pretty awkward here for black to move, right? Fairly weird setup, queen e8 and rook e7, queen e8, we play bishop b2, putting some additional pressure here on this pawn in some variations, right? Note that it's not going to be easy to disentangle himself here after he takes d4, c takes d4. It just even looks like black is just going to get killed. So after bishop b2, black can try this way, a6, but the move knight c4 again leaves a very nice compensation. In some cases, we'll be capturing here on d6, destroying the pawn structure. The pawn on d6 will be really weak. We'll be able to bother it through moves like bishop a3 and playing on this diagonal. Also, the knight on c4 is performing the important function of putting more pressure on the pawn e5. Instead of rook e7, like I said, black can also play queen e7 to defend the f7 pawn. And now bishop d3, knight a5. Right, so again, bishop d3, same idea. We're avoiding the trade. We don't want to trade this bishop for the black knight. Now after knight a5, we play queen a4, b6, and the typical maneuver also seen in the Ruy Lopez, knight f1. Knight is headed to either e3 or g3, and later on either d5 or f5. Now bishop b7 and knight g3. This is it's a complex position. It's a very good compensation. I wouldn't say it's a crushing advantage, but definitely a very promising play here for white. And for instance, and e5. Right, typical shot in the center, taking advantage of rook being on the same file as the queen over here. Let's say bishop f3 takes, knight c6, right? So it's not exactly a fork yet, because the rook here is will be under attack if we capture either piece on d6 or f6. But we can just play c takes d4, bishop b4, so black escapes with one of the pieces, rook f1, knight d5, queen b3, queen e6, bishop e4, knight is hanging, we're putting more pressure, knight c7 and f4 leaves the position. It's an unclear position, but white definitely has good chances over here. Now that we have all the theory done with the Evans Gambit, let's look at a practical game from 1995. Like I said, Kasparov Anand. Maybe not the most spectacular game, but nonetheless showing that this opening Evans Gambit has been applied at the highest level. And let's see how easily Kasparov crushed Anand here in 25 moves. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and b4, right? Here's our Evans Gambit starts. Bishop takes b4, c3, and Anand chose the line bishop e7. Now d4, the most popular choice here in this position, knight a5, and Kasparov played the move bishop e2, which is regarded here as the main move. White can also play, like I said before, knight e5 or bishop d3, and the move bishop f7, which, like we talked about, is a dubious option. But let's look at the game. Bishop e2, e takes d4. Here another option for black would be d6, but after queen a4, c6, takes on e5, takes on e5, knight e5, white is left with a slight advantage. So bishop e2 takes on d4, queen d4, and Anand chose the move knight f6, which is currently not regarded as the best option here for black. A better move is, like I mentioned before, d6, and this position, queen g7, bishop f6, queen g3, it's a both-sided play. Can follow, for example, queen e7, castles. Also, the move knight g5 has been played before. Interesting option. Castles, bishop d7, knight d4, and queenside castle. Yeah, this position gives black higher chances than what Anand played 15 years ago. Another move that has been played is d5 to give up this pawn instead of g7. Now if queen g7, bishop f6 will take on e4. So, and after, let's say, e takes d5, knight f6, c4 again, white is slightly better, but black is perfectly fine. So Anand played knight f6 and the active e5. Now, knight c6. Otherwise, the knight cannot, from f6, cannot really go anywhere other than g8, because after knight h5, g4 would leave white up a piece. So knight c6, queen h4, knight d5, and queen g3, putting some pressure here on the king side. Now the pawn g7 hangs. Anand had to play g6, weakening the dark squares around the black king. But there's not really an alternative to this, as after castling, bishop h6 will win the exchange, and both king f8 or rook g8 will leave the black king permanently discastled on top of the not very fast development here on the queen side. So Anand chose g6, Kasparov castled, and knight b6. If d6 immediately, then rook d1, knight b6, right, pinning here the pawn, bishop h6, making it impossible for black to castle. White has a big advantage. So knight b6 and c4, blocking the knight. Now d6, and again we're pinning that pawn, right? Make it harder to develop. Now knight d7. If black chose the natural bishop f5, then black collapses after c5. Too much pressure, we're gonna capture on d6, and it's pretty much over. So knight d7, and we're sacrificing another pawn, bishop h6, controlling the dark squares, preventing castle. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and takes. If d takes e5, then bishop g7, right? Black gets some unpleasant pressure here on the d file. Rook g8 and bishop e5 is a crushing advantage. So knight e5. Now, if white would choose this move after bishop f6, looks like, well, black has two pawns for the exchange, and it's just not good to give up this bishop here for that rook that's not doing anything. So this would kind of let black off the hook. That's why Kasparov didn't choose bishop g7 and instead developed another piece, knight c3, to have an option of maybe in some cases playing knight d5, knight e4, or knight b5, f6, and more pressure here on the center, c5. Knight f7, takes on d6, c takes d6. If knight d6, then both rook ac1, right, bringing last piece to action, and knight e4 give white a splendid play. So c takes d6, queen e3. Now that white has to complain in this position. Knight h6, we take the bishop, we take the knight, and bishop f8. This position is already really bad here for black. For instance, if bishop e6, looking natural, then queen g7 when we're attacking the rook, rook f8, and bishop b5. Okay, look at the horrible positioning of the black king on e8, bishop d7, rook e1, and let's say bishop b5, knight d5, and this is over. So black cannot play bishop e6. Instead of trying to kick out the queen here from h6, bishop f8, and we're back. Queen e3. Now king f7. If queen e7, then queen e3, queen f3, with overwhelming threats such as knight d5, putting maybe the rook on the e file, and there's always bishop b5 in the air also. So king f7 and knight d5. Now bishop e6, black is trying to do something about the development. knight f4. And now in this already really bad position, Anand blunders, which is not even a very obvious blunder, but still queen e7 loses the game immediately. And I'll let you guys figure out what to play here. The silent looking rook e1 made Anand resign here in this position due to the overwhelming threats. There is pretty much nothing to do. For instance, if the move bishop d7, then check, king e8, and now the queen can go somewhere along a bunch of squares here for the queen, right? Exposing the rook, the position's completely lost. Even if Anand had chosen the correct bishop c8, then after queen b3, king g7, rook ac1, the position is still resignable. So that's it for the Evans Gambit. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I hope some of you will start applying this in regular practice. And best of luck. Thank you.